Thank you so much for Projects for putting the event on today. We've got a few partners in, so Diversity and Ability, and we're going to meet Atif in a bit, so thank you. We've got Lorelei and Ross from Rich Earth Cafe, and Lorelei will talk about her work as well. And Mila is going to be on the panel as well. But we're going to kick off with Nat and Ruth, who are going to give you a bit of an intro to neurodiversity. So for those of you who aren't so familiar, and I know I've got friends and other people in the room today, so I really appreciate you coming. Thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Nat.
All right, well, hello everyone. Yeah, it'll do. All right, so as Matt said, I thought I'd give you a bit more of an introduction on who exceptional individuals are. I believe, Matt, was it founded about 8 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah, 8 years ago. And what makes us particularly unique is we are a neurodiverse organisation that supports people who are neurodiverse, and we happen to be ourselves. First of all, have any of you never heard of the term neurodiversity? Preaching to the converted, but I'll explain it anyway. So, originally, we were just called disabled, which wasn't the best press. So the neurodiversity movement kicked off, and this was about seeing difference as a positive. So some quick 101. Neurodiversity. Who here has neurodiversity? Yeah, everyone, okay? Yeah, every single person here has neurodiversity. All it means is neuro, brain, and diversity were all different. You also have some words like neurotypical, which means, it essentially means like muggle, you know? Not magic. To give you a bit of an idea, my name's Nat, and I have pretty much all of them, winning. But there are positives as well. So some people like to say, oh, being neurodiverse is like all negatives, but there's strengths and weaknesses. It's about understanding the difficulties and appreciating the strengths. So there are many different things. Now, my definition of neurodiversity is it's still kind of in flux, but the general 101 I like to say is anything which isn't inherently a disability. So society makes it a disability, but it doesn't have to be. So in utopia, it wouldn't need to be. And this is why some things count as being neurodivergent and other things do not. But just so you know, that term, it could go either way. So do not take this as a hard and fast rule. To give it in a quick nutshell, we've got dyslexia. That's about phonologics, about how the brain interprets written information. It doesn't have the information, it sees the information, and it will wobble it up. There's more of a complex reason, but that's the basics. Then you've got dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is as common as dyslexia, but no one's ever heard of it. Dyspraxia, in a nutshell, is having the information, having like a traffic jam, and taking a little bit longer to get it out. It can affect speech and movement. Then we've got autism. That is a massive one. You've got things like autism spectrum disorder, EECS, autism spectrum condition, same thing, a little bit nicer on the ears. Asperger's, now dated, but still very much used, and we'll talk about that a bit more. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Then we've got things like dyscalculia and dysgraphia. Now, they are not very well known, but they're just as common. So where dyslexia is about reading, dysgraphia is about handwriting. So if you're one of those people who look like you're about to stab the paper in half because your handwriting is so tough, could be a dysgraphic tendency. And dyscalculia is like dyslexia of the maths world, but it doesn't mean you're bad at maths. If any of you are bad at maths, you're just bad at maths. If you've got dyscalculia, it's like the numbers, they might move, you might process them, you might mistake a 5 for a 6. You might know that 1 + 1 = 2, but for some reason you always put 3. So it's about you can understand the concept, but the execution isn't always there. And then we've got the more complicated ones, like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette's. Are they neurodivergent? Well, they are, because it is a cognitive variation in terms of how the brain processes information compared to the general population, but they're not, because remember the definition I said at the start, it's about something which is in an ideal world, if society was all peace and love, it wouldn't be a disabling factor, where you could easily argue OCD and Tourette's can be. So is neurodivergence mental health? Well, it's not ill mental health, they're separate. But they definitely overlap, because if you spend your entire life swimming upstream, it's going to wear you down, it's going to batter you about a bit, And unfortunately, there is a link between mental health and being neurodivergent. It doesn't have to be that way, but for the time being. So that's like a quick overview. Now, the next question is, okay, Nat, you told me what it means to be neurodivergent, but, well, what different neurodivergences are, but how do you actually define it? You know, how do you diagnose it? Because I'm sure a lot of you here are like, oh, I think I might be. Well, the key thing is, if you are bad at reading, you know, bad at spelling, bad at communication, you know, if you're just bad at stuff, you're not neurodivergent. You're unlucky. But if you find things difficult, as well as things easy, then that's what it is. So neurodiversity, well, neurodivergence, is the fluctuation of ability. It's about having things you struggle with more than your peers, but things that you excel at and you're amazing. I like to look at neurodivergence as someone who is neurotypical is a generalist. Everyone loves a good generalist, but a neurodivergent person is a specialist. There is someone who, they might not be able to do everything, but they delegate the rest to people who can, and they do the things that no one else can. So in this example, and this is just one example, you might be really good at mathematics, like ridiculously good, but terrible at being creative. An amazing decision maker, but really struggling at communication. So with organizations, it's about acknowledging the difficulties and appreciating the strengths. So if you have that spiky profile, the chances are you are probably neurodivergent because it is not uncommon. Now the next thing is, okay, great Nat, you told me about what it is, seems pretty self-explanatory, easy definitions, nice stuff. But why is it so complicated? Why do people struggle with it so much? And it is because it is so unique. Honestly, is there really such thing as dyslexia and autism? They are labels created in order to help people better support individuals. But really, it is a spectrum. It's why I can have dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, OCD, and, you know, not be considered greedy. It's because the way the brain works is we have so many characteristics of one thing, enough characteristics of another, and we just so happen to give it a label. So for instance, like all these things co-occur with neurodivergence. If you have autism, the chances are you'll probably have anxiety in social situations. If you have ADHD, you're probably going to have sleep problems. Dyslexia, you could have OCD. All these things go together. Now, is being dyslexic a debilitating, a really crippling disability? No. But living in a world that doesn't understand you, it has knock-on effects. So unfortunately, mental health isn't part of it, but you can't separate it. So this gives you an idea of how complicated it is and how everyone has a different cocktail. So you might be diagnosed with one thing, but it doesn't mean you don't have something else. It just means that something else isn't a thing which is like having a negative impact on your life. So quick quiz time, because who doesn't love quizzes? All right, next. Is how many people do you think are neurodiverse? Like, any takers? You know, you're waving to your friend, but I'll take that as a, I know the answer. So how many people are neurodivergent in the world? 1 in 7. I feel like you read the script. But yeah, it is 1 in 7. Now, that is a really, really high number. You know, a few 100 years ago, we were like 1 in like a billion, then 1 in a million, and 1 in 1,000, and it's getting lower and lower. So currently, we're looking at about 1 in 7. It's not a witch hunt today, but some of you are neurodivergent. You know, the stats would say that. Now, there's also others, like dyslexia, about 1 in 10. Dyspraxia is about 1 in 10. ADHD, they say it's about like 1 in 100. Autism, about 1 in like 57. You know, the stats are all over the place, but the key takeaway is it's really common. So this isn't just like a really niche webinar today or like talk. It's, you know, it's a real thing. So next. The next one is dyslexia a disability? So hands up if it is a disability. Don't be shy. All right, cool, cool. And hands up if it's not a disability. Okay, some people didn't put their hands up. All right, do we have a fluffy cube?
We do. Where's the cube, Mike? Oh, yeah.
All right.
Can I throw it at you?
Yeah? Oh, God. Hey! Still dyspraxic, but... All right, would you mind if I ask you why you think it is a disability?
So the environment can make you disabled, but that's my take.
No,
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you. Appreciate it. And, sorry, Gemma, would you mind explaining why you think it isn't? Again, there's no wrong answer. Take that, it's fun.
So it isn't, because it's just a difference in ability. It's just differences. So it isn't really a disability, I don't think.
Great answer, thanks. Whee! Okay, so you probably want an answer. Is it a disability or is it not? Without sounding like a cop-out, it's both. So it is a disability, okay? And that's really, really important to know, because under the Equality Act 2010, things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, etc. are a disability, and that's a good thing, because it means that we are entitled to support. It means that if we are discriminated against, we are potentially protected. So, and it also validates people who struggle with it on a day-to-day basis. Any of you who might be dyslexic, who kind of got this under wraps, that must have took years to do. But it takes some people even longer to understand their brains. So I would never disregard dyslexia as a disability. But on the other hand, it's not a disability because it doesn't have to be. It's a different way of processing information. It's a way which allows you to solve problems and see things from a different perspective. It can be a massive, massive advantage. It can be your unique selling point. But society isn't really there for everyone. So for me, having dyslexia is a benefit. But when I was in school, it was a negative. So it can change where you are in your life. So yes, appreciate that it is a disability, but also appreciate that if you put a little bit of work, it doesn't necessarily have to be. All right, so my first thing is, what is dyslexia? Now, dyslexia is different to everyone, but I'll tell you kind of my general understanding. So dyslexia for me is about processing words. So for me, most people will be able to read phonologics. So they'll be able to break words down like ka, a, t, so they can sound the words out. For my brain, I struggle with that. So I remember words as images. So I remember the word like cat. And that's great. It's a different way of doing it. But they don't teach you that way in school. So obviously you're going to think you're dumb and you're stupid, and they're pushing you up a hill that you don't want to go up. So dyslexia is different. Now for other people, it's totally different. For example, this amazing powerhouse of a woman, Margaret Adeline Pocock. Any of you heard of her? Yeah, she's great. She is an amazing educator and space scientist. Now, the space industry isn't the most inclusive industry, and they're pretty much bookworms, work hard. Now, Margaret doesn't fit the mold. She's incredibly dyslexic, as well as other things which kind of puts her at, unfortunately, a disadvantage. But where others were able to do the papers and all the academics, she was able to bring it to life. Her amazing way of bringing subjects in an imaginatory way allowed there to be more funding in the industry. She was allowed to educate people, inspire the next generation. So is she better than others for having dyslexia? No. But she complements other people because of her dyslexia. She fills a niche in the market. People with neurodiversity aren't better nor worse. They're a complementary thing to society. They're able to see things that others are not. So before we go to the next slide, I want to show you an idea of what it could be like to have dyslexia. So does anyone in this room feel relatively confident and pretty certain they do not have dyslexia? I like you. Do you want to stand up? Okay, Matt, can we have a squishy ball?
Yep.
Sorry, mate, what's your name? Hazel. Nice to have you, Hazel. All right, Hazel, good luck. Okay, so go to the next slide, and I want you to read it out loud if you're able to. Nice, good luck.
Oh, no. Dementable reading disorder is the most common learning disability. Dyslexia is the most recognized of reading disorders. However, not all reading disorders are likened to dyslexia. That's really hard.
Okay, I'll put that, but well done, Hazel.
Thank you.
Okay, actually, Hazel, hold on for a second. So, could you read it?
It was very difficult, but yeah.
You could?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. All right, cheers. So, with dyslexia, you can read. One of the biggest myths of dyslexia is they can't read. Maybe a really small percentage of people with dyslexia can't read. It's just the way they have to learn to read is different. It's like someone gives you some words and it's gobbledygook. So like that text just there, You could read it, but it took more concentration than, say, other tasks might. And I think that's important to know. So do not give people with dyslexics tasks which involve reading, but find a way which works better for them. For me, I read loads of books, but I listen to Audible and I have the book at the same time. So it kind of kicks me up the bum so my brain stays focused. So I do read, I love reading, but I've had to find an alternative path. So my top tips on dyslexia is provide projects that allow them to engage their creativity. And creativity doesn't just mean good with arts and crafts. It means you like finding your own way to solve the problem. Be aware of extra effort that is applied for basic tasks. It might take a little bit longer, but it will be worth it. If you're at a company and you're like, no one's ever said they're dyslexic here, that's because, you know, they're being fine. Though it is something that affects you your entire life, it can have bigger or lower effects depending on your mental well-being. So if you're really stressed, it might affect you in a bigger way. So don't be surprised if no one tells you they're dyslexic if they're doing okay. You'll typically only find out when they're struggling. And that is something that we need to change. And lastly, dyslexia can look different for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So please stop saying, oh yeah, my cousin's dyslexic. You know, it's different.
Okay, so question, which brain shows a sign of ADHD? Hey, you are all wrong. It's actually option 1. And I'll tell you why. Next slide, please. Basically, that right side of the brain is for different cognitive tasks, right? And those people that are on the left side fail to activate. It's almost like, I know that I've got to do a specific task, and I know I've got to pursue it and process it. So when your different part of the brain's activated, it doesn't mean that you can't do the task, it just means you're using a different part of the brain to do it, which makes it incredibly difficult if you think about it. I get to do the task, but I'm using a different part of my brain to do it. And so that means we're not particularly wired to do that specific task. And so that controls empathy, impulse control, emotion, and decision-making. All of those are affected. There's like 12 different executive functions that are impacted by ADHD. And that could include task initiation, so starting a task. It could include things like goal orientation, or goal pursuit, actually completing a task. And when a person is not able to do those things, they've been labeled lazy before, which is completely inaccurate. It just means that they're using different parts of the brain to complete that task and need different strategies in order to actually complete the task. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of what it is, it's there, black and green and background. It's not a behavior disorder. It's not a mental illness. It's a developmental impairment of the brain self-management system, the way that the brain is managed. And so if you have that impairment of the way you manage the brain, then that means you're just going to have to find different strategies. Doesn't mean you're any less than. Next slide, please. So we talked about the spiky profile. You remember that? Anyone remember that? Hands up. Kind of. So we talk about the strengths and the spikes. We're very much advocates for strengths-based advocacy here at Exceptional Individuals. And so the strengths and the spikes of ADHD is being motivated by short-term deadlines. So working in sprints, because you know that you're going to, if you have a massive goal or a massive thing to do and it's too much, it almost becomes if everything's important, nothing's important. So the sprints help to be motivated, having a massive goal changed and reduced. Creative ideas, thinking outside the box. Most people live actually outside the box, so there's no even thinking, just living outside there. Relentless energy. Hyper-focus, has anyone heard of that term? Yeah? Being able to be really engaged in an activity. It's amazing. Sometimes you can forget to eat, and sometimes it can mean that you forget to listen to when people are talking. So for example, has anyone ever been so transfixed in what they're doing? Somebody's asked them a question, and they've agreed to something, and then weeks later they said, remember I told you that, and you have no recollection of it. Anyone? Show of hands? Yeah, that's also part of being in hyper-focus mode. Also, being good in a crisis. It's almost like that dopamine that comes in and being able to understand, actually, this is what we need to do. Let's get it done. And so that's a massive strength. Wouldn't you agree? These are great strengths. Yeah? Next slide, please. Okay, so if you're looking at ways to support a colleague, I haven't said ADHD. I truly believe that if we can just look at the challenges, we can actually pinpoint a roadmap that helps a person. So doing away with those labels, because they don't always help, because as you saw, there's 3 different types of ADHD. So if you just said, this works for all ADHD, it wouldn't be necessarily correct. So provide prioritized task lists if procrastination is a challenge. Give them time to process information and form opinions, because actually processing time can be a challenge as well. Like, my first thought isn't my first optimized thought. I could have lots of great ideas afterwards that are probably better. And dividing those long-term projects into segments to assign a completion goal for each segment. So again, just being very clear, but these are some of the milestones. This is all you need to get to. So yeah, that's it. Next slide, let's check. Okay, a note on women with ADHD. So there's gender bias when it comes to ADHD, and many women are misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because of the way that society perceives ADHD. And next slide, please. The reason why that is probably because of the intersectionality piece. Looking at the whole person, the race, class, sexuality, gender, etc., to understand that there are a compound effect of overlapping independent systems of discrimination and disadvantage. And without looking at the intersectionality of it all, you're actually missing out on helping a person, because you might deal with the challenges with procrastination, but are they able to enter the space and get fair treatment in the workplace because of those other groups that we've mentioned? So when we talk about ADHD, and specifically women, it's being very mindful that there's going to be underdiagnosed categories as well. And sometimes there's anxiety that it's mistaken for as well. And we've just got to be very careful what we're doing with these labels and if they're actually helping people or hindering them. So, next slide, please. Over to my colleague, Nat. Big round of applause, please.
Oh, yeah. Nice. Thanks, Ruth. All right, so we're getting there. So now autism is a big one. I can't explain it in a few minutes, but what you need to know is it's like a different way of thinking. It is a big spectrum, and you hear that all the time. So it just means that there's so many different ways that the brain interprets information and how it sees the world. I'm just going to go over some quick terms. So autism is autism spectrum disorder. Now that's the official term. That's what people will get diagnosed with. Now that used to be split into different categories. And one of them was, well, people used to say things about like high functioning, low functioning. Now the reason we don't really use those terms anymore is like high functioning was kind of like, all right, pretty, really great at everything. There was a bit of a hierarchy, and it meant you were kind of insulting someone who was low functioning. So we got rid of that. Then you had the term Asperger's. Now Asperger's is someone who has autism, but is able to function on a day-to-day, might have like particular gifts or talents, and potentially, visibly, you wouldn't notice they had anything, but they do struggle. But that was causing a bit of another hierarchy, and it meant that a lot of people weren't getting diagnosed because they were kind of falling out. Well, they don't have classic autism, they don't really have Asperger's. So it was getting confusing. So by combining it into one spectrum, we're really appreciating that everyone is different, and you can fit into different boxes. Because conventionally, say if you were non-verbal, people would have said low functioning. But you could be non-verbal and be an absolute powerhouse. You might be the smartest person that's a bit arrogant, but the smartest person that your friends know. So this is a much more inclusive way of talking. Now, if any of you resonate with having Asperger's, that's completely fine. Because before 2013, I believe, it was official diagnosis. So I would say, if someone says they have Asperger's, don't correct them. That's what they have. That's what they recognize with. But just appreciate that going forward, you're probably not going to hear it that much. My favorite person who has autism is Greta. Now, Greta, she's not very good at going to school, bless her. But that's not the autism. She might struggle with social situations, but she's really hyper-focused. So yes, she might struggle with the social side, but when it comes to something she's passionate about, like, I don't know, saving the planet, she is on it. And that is autism. It's about putting your focus in different areas. Let's go next, Matt. So on here, this is a really classic way of explaining it, Windows and Mac. So hands up here if you use Windows. There's some people. Now, hands up if you use Mac. I'm definitely in Brighton. So, which one's better or worse? Honestly, like, if we're being honest, they're as good as each other. They can do the exact same thing. But Windows is more compatible with things because society was built around Windows. Applications were built around Windows. Anything for Mac, unfortunately, has been a second thought. And normally not as great compatibility, kind of less issues. That's autism all around. Autism isn't better nor worse than those who do not have autism, but the challenges come because society wasn't built for it. Yes, a lot of people can get by and mask, but they're still going to find a lot of things challenging. It's not going to be second nature. Next. The next example is the tube map. So autism on the surface comes across as really random, like people like they're flapping all over the place, they're screeching. It seems ridiculous. Or they're making like these weird thoughts. Autism is not random. It's anything but. So let's say we're at Oxford Circus and we want to get to Holborn. What do you reckon is the quickest line to get there? Central line, right? It makes sense. It's the quickest line, it's the cheapest line, it makes the most logical sense. But someone with autism might say, start at Oxford Circus, they might, take down like there. Okay, we're at Westminster, we're going to take the Thames Clipper, we're going to go up the river. They're the only person ever to take the Emirates airline and eventually back up. That journey is ridiculous. It takes more time, it costs more money. Why are they doing it? Now, if we actually took the time to get to know them and understand them, we might find out they did their research. The line was busy, there was a leaf on the track, they needed more time to process how their mind works, they wanted to have access to Wi-Fi, so they want to go outside. There's 1,001 reasons why they might have done something that you do not understand. So the first thing you can do is just ask them. But then another thing you need to take into consideration is they might not know themselves. A lot of people who are diagnosed are slapped with a label and told, good on you. But we're still on a journey. So appreciate that you may not understand why they do what they do. They might not understand why they do what they do. But there's a reason they do what they do. Autism is not random. Next. So a couple of top tips that I'll recommend is, first of all, allow them to follow their own processes to achieve their goal. They have spent their whole life being autistic. They might not be got it completely under wraps, but I'll tell you they're the best expert around on it. Next, provide projects that involve their interests. If people with autism can get really passionate about something, nothing's going to stop them. It's one of the big advantages of people with autism, the passion. Then we've got repetitive tasks can be comforting. This isn't for everyone, but for some things that you and I might find a bit boring, mundane, they might find comforting and reassuring. So do not put your values and your beliefs onto someone else. Speak with them, find out what works for them. And lastly, don't be alarmed at atypical physical behavior. So there's a thing called stimming, where you might see flapping or moving around. That is the body's way of regulating itself because the world is crazy, it's overstimulating. Think about it's like the volume kind of turned up. It can get really loud. So it's just another way of kind of expressing the body. So it is perfectly normal. But that, for me, is the kind of A to Z of neurodiversity in a nutshell. Go next, Matt. I think that's it. So now I'm going to finish up for me and pass it on to Ruth for the home run. So thanks.
Okay, who's ever watched Harry Potter? Surprisingly, not many people. Okay, so Daniel Radcliffe has dyspraxia, and dyspraxia is basically a learning difference that affects how the mind processes actions, usually affecting coordination and movement. So from my own dyspraxia, I know that it took me a while to learn how to swim. But once I got it, I nailed it, and it took me a while to learn how to drive as well. But once I done 5 or 6 different tests, I nailed it. Looking at the strengths in the spikes, and I know we're rushing this a little bit, but that's because we've got a panel coming up, and the panel are going to give you something that you can't get from some of the stuff we're sharing here, and they're absolutely amazing. So we want to give them enough time to share their wisdom and personal stories as well. So, a person with dyspraxia, great strategic thinking and problem solving. That basically just means in terms of you might see a problem, they'll find a way to get through it, to really be problem solving focused. Creative and original thinking as well, seeing those 2 different parts of the world and being able to amalgamate them as well. Determined and hardworking, and that perseverance is massive and highly motivated, and resilience comes in bucket loads. when you have dyspraxia, because it just almost becomes this, I know I can do this, I just got to keep on doing it a different way sometimes just to find the thing that's going to help me. Okay, next slide, please. So, what is one dyspraxic strength? So, these are some, right? High sense of empathy. Is there any more in that one? And collective developed soft skills. So, sometimes when you are in the workplace, you can almost feel traumatized. Has anyone ever felt that? Traumatized from the workplace, yeah? And it can allow you to really understand how you don't want to be treated, what bad looks like. And it can give you that empathy for others because of that, which makes you a better leader because you want everyone else to be able to experience that, right? Am I right? Can I say yes? Can I hear a yes? Okay, great. Okay, and obviously that resilience, again, amid being really perseverance, amid no matter what. And I think that's a really great skill because that means that you're going to get somebody in your organization or in education that is able to persevere no matter what. Next slide, please. So some, I guess, best practice tips. Again, this is about concentration, focus, and fatigue challenges. First tip, step-by-step directions. It can be really challenging to hear directions, and you've almost got 7 or 8 different steps, and it's all done at once. But if you give somebody step-by-step form, it's really helpful because with the working memory challenge, sometimes if you've given somebody instructions and it's not step-by-step, they'll remember the first thing, but not remember the maybe middle. They might remember the last. Allow flexibility in work style and performance. That could include anything from the hours of work or seeing things at a different angle and allowing themselves to be free and creative with how they solve a problem. And also continuous attention rather than switching between several tasks. People always talk about multitasking, which is actually a massive myth, and it reduces your cognitive functions as well. So this is actually good tips for anyone. Continuous attention rather than switching between several tasks is going to improve productivity and performance as well. Come take your bow.
Thank you very much. So we're going to jump straight onto the panel. Can we start by hearing from each of you, firstly, who you are and what your relationship is to neurodiversity? Mila, as you've got the mic, do you mind kicking us off?
Hi everyone, I'm Mila and I'm dyslexic. I was diagnosed when I was 19 years old during my first year of university. And I went through a whole array of emotions when I was diagnosed. I was really, really angry. Yeah, I kind of felt like, okay, I'm dyslexic, this is great, but then I got really angry, and I used that for about the first 5 years of my career, this anger, and it propelled me forward.
Thanks, Mila. And what do you do? Where are you from? So you're from Projects Today, right?
Yep, I'm from Projects. I'm the creative director here, so I look after sort of brand and business strategy and vision, and my favourite thing to do is create a community that is really inclusive and supportive for everyone.
Thank you, Mila. And Ross?
Oh yeah, just going to follow that template. So my name is Ross. I've just set up a cafe with my friend who's also neurodiverse with dyslexia, if you're happy for me to share that with everyone. Done it now. Here at Project, so we're running the cafe downstairs. Come and see us sometime. I have dyscalculia. Some people call it dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia for numbers is how I explain it. And I have struggled my entire life with not just that, but the confidence that comes with misunderstanding certain things. It's like magic. Certain things just don't make sense, and I can do it 100 times and get different results. And prior to setting up a cafe, I ended up as head of global programs at a big international charity working on LGBT rights, which of course means multi-million-pound budgets, and that's quite stressful. And so I paid secretly, even though I could have got it through work, to go to the Dyslexia Society and have a test. And it's quite hard to diagnose dyscalculia because lots of people hate maths or find it difficult math. And halfway through the test, they said, hands down, you got it. And I don't get angry. I just feel this very young boy that I've always been hard on. And I just finally was able to give him a break. So, yeah, that's me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Atif Choudhury. So I'm dyslexic and dyspraxic and some would say ADHD. So I run a couple of things really. Mostly, I'm proud to say that I run a side. Some of you might see it, a fair trade olive oil company in Palestine who works with families in the West Bank, and we're in Taj and Infinity and those sort of things. So it's in every Oxford shop in the country. Why I'm bringing that up is because it's an idea that's quite different, outside the box, to do something in the middle of the most famous political conflict in the world. But I think it worked really well because of the way I look at the world, rather than despite it. And in that space, I am part of a team, and I'm one of the founders of an organization called Neurodiversity and Ability, which we support people in universities and in the workplace and education. And we've probably supported about 80,000 people over the last 12 years. And we're advising the UN on how they understand neurodiversity so they can make better principles. And I struggled a lot at school, as many of us do. And it's an issue of shame for me, but those stories change, and I always say, like, shame dies when it gets to tell a story. And I'm really proud, and I wouldn't change it if I could. I'm getting to advise the World Health Organization now, and I can't imagine doing those things unless I could feel those things. So I'm really proud of that. Anyway.
I love that. I'm an author, comedy writer, and creator of a new show called Life in ADHD, which is comedy series about the hilarity and horror of living with ADD. Yeah, because I think for me it's been a real lifeline, learning to laugh at myself, because I'm not going to lie, it's not fun. It's really hard on a daily basis. It's a struggle, but for me and my friends, the way through has been just laughing at ourselves. So that's why I created the show. It's very much looking at lots of angles of neurodiversity, but ADD in particular. I'll talk about that more in a bit, but it's part of a collective I set up called Melancomedy, which is comedy about melancholy things, which started 5 years ago, and we've been doing stuff about mental illness, the plastic crisis, misogyny, anything that's a bit sad, finding the laugh, because I think comedy has a really unique power to reach out and make people laugh and then realise they're not alone. Well, so I wanted to also say it looks like I'm on my phone and being rude. It's because I have literally no memory. So this is my external hard drive. So I'm just looking at my notes if anyone thought I was being rude. A bit about my diagnosis journey. I think it was at university I started to realise I was a bit different, and everything was a struggle that didn't seem like it needed to be a struggle. And I went to see various doctors. Throughout my 20s was kind of told, oh, you have anxiety and obsessional traits, and was given loads of different, it went down the road of lots of different types of CBT, which is just admin. Was like, no, I think it's ADD, had an examination, and then they lost my file, which I couldn't believe that. So they denied that they'd actually diagnosed me. So then I was back out of the room and told, oh no, here's some antidepressants. But it wasn't until I went to Melbourne and met another comedian in a swimming pool, and we started talking about our symptoms. She was like, how have you made it through life this far? And sent me to her specialist, and then he gave me an attention test and then gave me medication afterwards and was like, no, you definitely have it. So then I went back to the doctor in the UK, and he's like, oh yeah, you do seem better on it. But the reason he wouldn't tell me I was ADD before is in the UK, they are so obsessed with the idea that if you've had achievements, you can't have ADD. So he was like, oh, you've had a book published, you got a first, you can't possibly have ADD, you'd be on that windowsill over there. And so that's something, one of the main reasons I started making comedy is I really want to show that that's ridiculous. And we're incredibly intelligent people, we just don't function in the same way. That's probably,
Thanks,
more I could
Lorelei.
say, but
No.
Yeah.
I want to hear about the comedy, and how have you found incorporating the ADD into your work, and what have the challenges been there?
I think the whole thing, especially with the Life in ADHD, which is my most recent comedy, I do struggle with structure and organisation, like in such a crazy amount but deciding to write something about that and depict the chaos that is in my brain, so the show is showing that on screen. So it was in the edit suite with my editor that worked on it. She's an absolute genius. She has autism, and so the whole show was a real celebration of the different strengths of neurodiversity, because it was her militant, organised, clear-thinking brain that could see through the chaos. And so she ended up editing and making it, all make sense. But I think that's something I'm really passionate about. I was just at Edinburgh TV Festival and having a rant whenever I could about how the industry, all the creative industries are obsessed. Do a one-pager, write the log line, simplify your idea into a short email. When you have ADD, you've got a million ideas a second flying at lightning speed, and they're all colliding with each other. It's like you've got an air traffic control, but no one's working in it. They're all asleep. So all the thought aeroplanes keep crashing at the same time. So it's very hard to, and some of them are great ideas, some of them are ridiculous. Like, yeah, I could tell you some of my ridiculous interventions I've had. But the point is, I think all the creative industries need to change how they receive work from creatives, because they're biased towards the neurotypical process and the brain that can write 15 words in an upload form that then crashes and just sends you insane. So that's something I just did a big talk about. I've come up with loads of ways that I want to help people get their work out, that they need to change. The gatekeepers. I use the analogy of building a ramp, basically. It's like quotas isn't enough. They need to actually build a ramp. Sorry, it's occupational hazard and waffling, sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, every time I've met Atif a few times, and every time I meet with him, I leave with just my brain blown, because it's such an education for me, and that receiving of information. And one thing we touched on the other day was diagnosis, Atif, and without going into too much keeping it high level, the detail around it and the importance of it, but you had some other views as well. Could you share a bit about diagnosis and what you've seen over the last kind of 15, 20 years working in the space?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's difficult to tell in a short bullet, but in terms of diagnosis is really important for a lot of people, because it's where some healing can start, And one of the biggest blocks that we've got in these conversations, and it resonates, the learning isolation, the constant hits, and to be able to look at yourself and forgive yourself for things that you shouldn't even have to forgive yourself for, right? So that diagnosis can be really important. It can be really healing for a lot of people, and a conversation that you can go back to yourself and your families and the people who love you. But there's a challenge, and there's a real challenge, because diagnosis itself is not something that everyone wants. Just as we hold shame, diagnosis itself can represent shame. For some cultures, it can represent deep culture. And if we, Ruth rightly talked about intersectionality. And I'll say it, if we don't have an intersectional understanding of the barriers that people face, then we're not going to have a relevant understanding of the barriers people face. It's going to be that hard. So some cultures, a diagnosis is a source of shame. It's something you wouldn't talk to people about. And just as there are people who may come out in their lives and want to come out, whatever that difference is they're hiding in the workplace, there's some people who come out in the workplace that dare not come out at home. And there are there's some realities to that. So the conversation isn't really about whether diagnoses are good or bad, but really try to understand who is it that gets to say they're neurodiverse and those who don't get to say. And the conversation, how do we understand about impact? Not who has a label, but rather who's desperate to feel welcomed. Not because they got a superpower, or not because they got a trauma, or they're traumatized, but just because they deserve to be welcomed. And not everyone should have a diagnosis in order to get that welcome. So some good work to do there. I'm thinking about that.
Thanks, Atif. And Ross, you talked about it a bit. You are working now and launching this cafe, and two of you have got different neurodiversities. How is that? I know diagnosis was extremely important to you, but how is the dynamic, and how important it is to have those different mindsets that you've got?
Well, I hope Laura doesn't mind me talking about the business together, but it's incredible how very quickly, because I think when I finally found the confidence to go to university, I completely shocked myself and aced it all the way through. I worked hard because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't an idiot based on the history. And I found that actually words are my thing. And Laura and I have very, very, very quickly got into a pattern. Laura loves numbers. Laura loves analysis of numbers. And, I would have run us into the sound already 8 weeks in. And I lead in a lot of the emails because, or whatever other, sorts of things we have to do around conversations. Some of them can be, sensitive or complex or whatever, and I find that I can find a way to articulate things in a sort of slightly succinct way, that kind of thing. And we're very comfortable with those two roles. They complement each other really well.
Yeah, I mean, talking about teams and working with teams, Mila, you have a team, and one thing that I find really interesting where the conversation's gone over the last 10 years is you're here speaking in front of your team and openly disclosing that you are neurodiverse, you are dyslexic. How is that for you, and how was that journey to getting to that point? Have you always told organisations that you've worked out you're dyslexic? Is this a new thing?
Good question. No, I definitely haven't always told people that I'm dyslexic. It's really only been in the last 5 years that I found any comfort and confidence in the strengths that come with dyslexia, as opposed to always fighting against the challenges that come with it. And yeah, feeling confident enough to say, hey, yeah, I'm not great at spelling, but actually I know that, and I've got my tools in place now, so I can sort of check myself, and actually it's okay for me to go and ask someone else to read my stuff. That's fine too. And yeah, that's going to take me longer, but hey, I can do all these other things, and you people can't do it. So, and especially in the last couple of years, I felt really confident in talking about it. And what's really important to me now with the team is helping my team feel really comfortable, whether they have a diagnosis or not. Actually, like we've said, everyone is neurodiverse. So whether you have a label, actually we all have our strengths and our weaknesses and this and that. And let's just look at the person and work with them and what is a good, productive, happy environment or task. And there's no need to be so rigid. And I think when an organisation truly does that, not only do they have really happy people, but they're going to be so much more likely, to make good impact, but also just to succeed, right? Because they're going to spend less time going against the natural person. Do you know what I mean? That makes sense in my head.
So we're going to open questions to the audience. Nat, can you get the roaming mic ready without throwing it too hard at people? So if anyone has questions, please do put them to the panel. But one thing I want to kind of not finish on, because we're going to get questions, but coming here today, what made you come here today? What made you volunteer to be on our panel? What made you come? And we'll start with you, Mila, if that's all right, and go across.
So one of my strengths is that I'm generally quite a good people person, and I love talking in front of people. However, I've noticed in the last few years that I've gotten a little bit more nervous when I'm doing that, and then my words don't come out. So I wanted firstly to challenge myself, do more of these things so that I can look at you all and maybe make sense. And also, I just think it's so important to have the conversation. And I'm really enjoying the fact that my boss is here and part of my team are here. And it's just lovely that, be open about these conversations, and hopefully it'll inspire other people to do the same if they feel comfortable. And unfortunately, not all organisations are going to be accepting. So, do what's right for you.
When I meet people, and Lorelei said it earlier, she's like, she's talking a little bit about, I've got a problem, because obviously it opens up conversation. I'm like, go and have an analysis, go and find out, because it is life-changing. And also, if you haven't had one, going to the Dyslexia Society, they don't just test you, because it fits within your general IQ. So you have to get tested for your IQ. You have to get tested for your language skills, your empathy skills, your cognitive abilities, everything. I came out with this complete MOT of who the hell I am. And I was like, well, this is just interesting in and of itself. So, that's why I'm here today.
Cool. Why am I here today? Because you asked me to.
I guess Atif works in the space is slightly different. But can I rephrase it? The changes that you've seen in the space over the last 10 to 15 years, how are you seeing the change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the conversation is growing. I think we're in a good place. I'm excited that we're not where we used to be. We're not where we should be, but at least we're not where we were. So the idea that there's the problematization narratives, the difficulties, I was doing this for a while, more than 20 years. So that space of specific learning difficulty. So now we're moving the conversation away from problematization and introducing strengths. But the strength of conversation, I think, is not necessarily a mature place yet either, because it's going from 0 to 100 miles an hour like superpower all of a sudden, and it's not helpful. So it's trying to recognize, how do we participate and build belonging? So neurodiversity is that conversation, right? And it was wonderfully said, and it's been said. Look, we're all neurodiverse, but we're not all marginalized because of it. And that's the work to do. And that's the strength of the work to do. And that's the conversation of identity and belonging. How do we get there? I'm a Brighton organisation. How could, diversity and ability, how could we not be here? And we would love to, especially when Matt's asked so nicely. So it's those things. But recognising one thing that's really important is it's also, the challenges are also attached to class. Who gets to hear about these conversations? It's going to be a large body of university graduates. What's happening to working class people who are migrants, for example, where these conversations aren't being said, from black ethnic minority groups where these conversations are not steeped in power? If you are coming from, say, dealing with structural racism, you might have to do more in the workplace. In fact, you will have to do more in the workplace to get further in the workplace. So you're hardwired to share less in that same workplace. Even if other people are talking about autism and dyslexia, it doesn't mean folks who look like you are talking about dyslexia and autism. So those challenges are there, but the conversation is changing. As I said, I think we're in a really better place than we were. But we're just not in the space where we need to be, because it isn't a Eurocentric discussion about how Europe maps out neurodiversity. It's a global conversation about how different cultures and identities connect to these differences and the celebrations of those differences and the ingenuity behind those differences. We're still at a really infant stage on this, but we're at an exciting stage, because like folks like you are coming here, we're coming here, people are talking about this, it's changing. So I think, I might just stop on that, but just say, yeah, and it's going to get better, but it's going to need participation from many different classes and cultures and identities to say, we fit in here too.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. One is that I guess I just wanted to support this event because it's amazing, but also push myself because I hate public speaking. I'm not a stand-up comedian, so yeah, it's just like trying to keep doing as many of these things. And also, so actually it's 3 points. Sorry. Second point is that I don't know if anyone else realizes, but when you write the word neurodiversity in Word or a Google Doc, it underlines it in red, like it's not a word, and I just can't. It just blows my mind that we're still having to live in a world where we're a typo according to Google and Apple, and I'm just like, how? And I keep putting it on Twitter, but it's not taken off, and I'm like, yeah. So please follow me on Twitter at Lorelei Mathias, because I literally, how is that still the case? And then yeah, finally, the stuff I've been making is totally no budget. It's all like, I got made redundant during COVID, and I've just kind of been doing that. So if anyone, I'd love people to watch it and just share it and engage with it, because we're trying to obviously get a TV channel to like it and get it to take off, but it all starts with likes and shares. So
we've done this a few times before. We've put this out to the audience, and it's worked really well, but we're limited on time. So one thing I please ask you, I know so many of you have got neurodiversity stories and you want to share that, and we'll have time afterwards to share between each other. So if we could stick to questions for the panel just for the next 15 minutes, and then I'm so happy to hear your stories, and all our team are here, Diversity, Ability, and others are here as well to hear those. So who would like to ask a question to the panel? Yes. Nat, go ahead with it. If you talk into the top of this box, it is a microphone. Or was a microphone. Here you go. Use this.
ADHD so I can shout. Loud and proud. So, hi for everyone. My name's Kirsty. So I don't know if this is a little bit controversial, and I hope it's okay for me to ask this. But I've been doing a few podcasts and stuff recently, which is still all new to me, and I get asked a lot about my journey as an adult female, and what that's been like, and about my experiences, and some of them I can really resonate with yours. So I'm always really uncertain as to how much I should talk about this, really, the medication around it. But I wonder if there is potentially an unnecessary struggle where there are potentially a solution. And I'm not saying that we should or we shouldn't go down the medication route, but I do think that medication is one route. So I have an ADHD coach that I work with. That's a thing. And then there's also medication, of which you can use to temporarily support you while you're going through some of these journeys. And I just wondered what your thought process was, really, rather than me doing the questioning it, sort of just wondering, just for me personally, what your thoughts were, and if that's something you're advocates of or not, or if any of you have had any of those experiences. Long question, sorry.
That's all right. We're going to ask Lorelei and Atif on this one. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and it's a combination of medication and therapy that I think you need. And for me, I swim in the sea, and that's a lifeline. Like the cold water, I definitely think it helps my brain. But for me, the journey to getting that medication was like, it's like you have to do a crystal maze admin zone to get to it. So it's medication is to help people that clinically can't do admin, but it's like my doctor said, it's like, I don't know, it's rounds and rounds of referrals and all of that, and going around in circles with it to eventually get given some medication or get referred, and then there's a waiting list. But yeah, my doctor said it's like asking people with a broken leg to climb a big mountain, and at the top is where your medication might be, or your therapy, or your help. Is that even answering your question? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, it's a courageous conversation to have, right, with yourself as to where you fit into that and how you feel. Medication, I mean, it's a big word, right? And it can, we can use it for different things. The most important thing for me is how a person individually feels connected to it. Do they feel that it's part of a supportive dynamic for them? Do they feel it's part of a dependency dynamic for them? Do they feel it's part of something that they're ashamed to use or don't need? These are all, and that takes a lot of time when you're processing what may be or coming to terms with the diagnosis itself. And I take on board that it is really hard. It's like getting a pair of crutches at the end of the London Marathon that you desperately needed before you even had to race. But if that helps you make choices, of which medication might be one, then that's an individual choice and a sense of identity that may be really helpful for some, but it may not be for others. And it's, I guess, my conversation and question is, on what terms do you make those choices?
Thank you, Atif. Yeah, Nat, who are we asking? Yeah, there's lots of people. We've got time for 2 more questions. Yeah, go, sorry.
What advice would you give to someone? I mean, I got diagnosed with dyslexia a couple of years ago, and the last company I was with didn't believe me. They made my life a living hell and I had to leave. I've been applying for jobs in graphic design. I applied for 1,000 jobs. Still haven't got anywhere. Even when I go on about disability confident employers, why do they give me long application forms that I have to fill in? And then because of COVID, I'm better talking face to face and then having 5-minute interviews on Zoom. And it's really frustrating, but you go on about the conversation about, that people will understand, but they don't understand. It's like you have to do an interview. It's come to a point now that I've actually given up looking for jobs now because, a little bit of freelance work here and there, and I don't want to have a label, but when sometimes you're in a work situation and you're struggling, nobody wants to help you. So it's like people. You said, you got diagnosed how many years? I got diagnosed 2 years ago. For 50 years, I've had to deal with it without knowing. So I just want to know what advice you can give to someone who is trying to get back into the world of work, but, how can you... Is there any hope for anybody like me trying to get back into the world of work again?
Thank you very much for sharing that. Can I hand over to Mila and Ross on this one? People that are diagnosed later in life.
I really, really feel for you because when like I said, I did well at uni and on paper I looked great, but to get an entry-level job in what I did, which was like working in like an NGO, just to be the PA, part-time personal assistant to one of the guys in there, I had to do tests. I had to show that I could use spreadsheets. I can't. And but I'd been lucky enough through a friend to, jumped into an internship so they knew who I was. And that's my privilege. That is, I know it is. I'm a gay man. I was moving into a HIV charity. There's a lot of other LGBT people there. And I leaned on that social capital. When they looked at my test results, the guy that came in, they went, "How did it go?" And I went, "Really badly." And they went, "Oh, I'm sure you did fine." I saw his face, he looked over my shoulder, and he was like, because I hadn't filled it in. I literally just panicked, and I couldn't fill it in. And again, they just went away, because I didn't know myself. I still hadn't got the diagnosis. And again, they went away scratching their heads, being like, this doesn't compute with the things we're seeing in the office. He's a hard worker, he gets things. Why is his test scores coming back so low? And I think they just decided, you know, he's the guy for us. Anyway, I won't go into more detail. And then when it was in that role that I decided to secretly go and get tested, because I was like, if I don't have this, then what's my excuse? I'm just thick. That's how I felt. And but when I did, it did come back. And I was lucky because I was working in the NGO sector that is falling over itself to be inclusive and diverse as possible. And so when I went on for the bigger roles, I left that organisation, went on to other roles, I just smacked it down on the table. I did have one doubt, and I was like, should I disclose this or not? And I went to some friends, and they were like, Ross, if you don't disclose, you haven't got a leg to stand on. But they are legally obliged to respect this paperwork. And so in my interview for my last job, which was, you know, running big budgets, I said, I'm going to need a ton of time with your finance teams, and you have to honour that. And they did. They were fantastic about it. So for me, it's been really helpful having that paperwork. But I can imagine if you weren't in that sector or, you know, had those opportunities, it could be different.
I just would like to say on that, definitely there is hope, but it's so frustrating. So for me personally, there have been lots of job applications that I have done, and I noticed the ones that didn't go well are big public bodies like the NHS or universities or even charities. Actually, they can't take your CV, therefore you have to take out all your, and fill in all these specific questions, and that's so hard. And I just found that that didn't work for me. So then I decided, or I figured out that, okay, where am I going to get that? I'm going to get it in small, growing organisations, and that's where I focused because, I had to, actually, quite simply. So I think understanding, where you are really strong, and unfortunately, kind of like actively looking for those roles, or at least this is what I did. I sort of accepted that I'm going to find that really hard to get into because I don't fit into your boxes. Yeah.
Thank you, Mila. One final question. Yes. Let me run over to you.
This is for Atif, and it speaks to some of the other things that we've heard here today. There's something that's been troubling me about when we talk about dealing with the workplace, dealing with institutions, dealing with schools. And we've spoken a lot about intersectionality, we've spoken about class and race and queerness and all of these other things that come in that kind of compound issues that neurodiverse people struggle with. What do you say to the companies and the organisations who do their lip service, their token research, they decide that they're going to be a diverse organisation, and that without changing themselves from the inside out, they will be failing on every single one of the missions that they purport to uphold?
Thank you very much. Maybe if you could all have a go at answering this one, would be great as a last question.
I just wanted to give you applause for asking that question. It was fantastic. Inclusion is about insisting people count. And we've got to know the difference between that. When an organisation said, we've got lots of women, well, which women? What are the stories behind that? And then again, if we talk about neurodiversity, but we don't talk about intersectional barriers of participation, then autism is about white middle-class men who are good at IT, and it's nothing else, right? And the 90s made sure it was that. Yeah? So we have got some deep work to do to look at social realities. And as I said, if you don't have an intersectional understanding of the barriers, then how can you have a relevant one? Yeah. So yeah, but you're right. You're watching companies right now talking about talent acquisition and strengths and looking for their next Rain Man or their next thing, and they are commodifying that. That's absolutely true. And that's not a small thing at all. It's shocking how that's happening. So the question is, how do we speak truth to power in that space? Well, it starts by looking deeply about what do we want in these spaces, do you know? And how do we cultivate something? I've got a real issue on the dependency on diagnosis because I'm interested in impact. I want to know, what is the impact of learning isolation with someone who's facing street poverty, homelessness, and does not have an access to a diagnosis? Do they not get to call themselves neurodiverse or neurodivergent? Are they just neurotypical? And what do we mean by that as a community when we deny people those spaces, when their very sheer survival or lack of it? These are reality checks that we ourselves, who are part of the conversations, need to invite others. And it's tough work, but you guys are all doing it, and nobody's not doing that, right? It's just how do we make it a constant? And so when we look at companies, I agree. Look, I said earlier, I'm really proud. We're as DNA is advising the World Health Organization, but it's advising the UN. The UN has 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. It's worth looking at, 17 goals. It's zero poverty, zero hunger, zero quality education. These are things. We're watching corporates. We work with Fujitsu, Sony. And then you look at the UN itself and you think, of these 17 goals, not one of them is disability. That's brilliant. That's fantastic. Because it's not othering people. It means that you don't get to these 17 goals without the participation of people. Whatever forms they come in, you don't have zero hunger, zero quality education, equal opportunity employment. You don't have those things without the experiences of marginalized people being woven throughout every single one of those goals. It's fantastic. It means it doesn't get to be othered. So how do you make that challenge? You make that really clear to everybody that's involved in this between now and 2030, what their commitment is. And to recognize, and I'll stop on this thing, is that if you look at the Equalities Act, it's so incredible, guys. It's not a different version of the 95 Discrimination Act. It's telling us to anticipate and to not to welcome, I say DNA would say welcome, anticipate and welcome, but to anticipate that people will come with differences. Not just don't get caught for being offensive, but anticipate that they will come in differences. So we take companies and be a small, and we've got to figure out how small medium enterprises are part of this. It's important. You should not get sued, right? So compliance means you don't get sued. But it doesn't mean you include. So what do you have to do as a culture and as an organization and as a parent, as a loved one, as a husband or a wife, as a decision maker, as a leadership, to make sure you make that difference? And how do you make it beyond just corporate rhetoric because it's fashionable at the time? It's good work to do, but it needs all of us to be asking the kind of questions you rightly asked.
Can I answer that question really quickly? Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things I was going to say is see it, be it. And if you know, at the moment, there's not enough people that are openly neurodivergent in high positions. But yeah, I was going to say just a couple of other points that I think it's, with most workplaces and most creative industries or whatever industry you're trying to get into, there's barriers, but they're invisible. I think that's the problem with it. That's what's slowing down improving access. But we need to have some sort of like joint charter across all the industries that says, what are the struggles? You know, how can we change the application process? Because, you know, it's really sad hearing your story of like having to fill in all those forms and, you know, there's no kind of awareness of that. And then with ADD, you know, you operate in a completely different time zone. You know, like for me, it's GMT plus 2. Everything's, you know, but there's no awareness of that in deadlines and application forms. So I think it's about all coming together somehow and agreeing 5 basic principles of how applying for a job could be different for these different mindsets. And one inspiring quote was from Rory Bremner, who's been kind of being my mentor with the show, is that because he has ADD, I don't know if anyone knew that, he did an amazing documentary about it. And then I've been harassing him for years, and he finally had lunch, and he's like, how could I help? So I'm like, right, okay. And then he said this lovely sentence, which was, people living with ADHD are the shark bait, the ones that go the extra mile and warn others of danger. We're the ones who take risks and show others where the possibilities are. And I just think that's really lovely, but we're not going to be able to do that if we can't get through the door. So that's probably, yeah.
Thanks, Lorelei. Guys, anything to add?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I came here with my personal life experience, but I'm, much more familiar with pinkwashing and greenwashing. So actually, it's a really fascinating point. I think, just going back to your point, it's the idea of, we are where we are, our generations, I guess. It's taking it back to those educational pieces. I know nothing about this, but my ears pick up when I hear about, I don't know, Scandinavian ways of assessing people and it not being this Dickensian way of just writing something down with the clock ticking. And, being able to assess people in different ways can, ultimately lead to people being able to promote themselves in different ways, I guess.
I think that goes without saying. Thank you so much for everyone coming today, and I know some friends have come and people that work at projects, and a massive thank you for projects for hosting, and Ross for coming along and contributing. Atif as well for your expertise and diversity and ability, and I do encourage people to look diversity and ability up afterwards, and Lorelei as well. I really want to share your video. Can we send it out to everyone after as well? Is that okay? Yeah. So if anyone wants to know about a workplace needs assessment, we've got a table in the corner. Kinga and Danny are going to be sitting over there. And one thing we've said about this event is we do workplace needs assessments pretty much for free with people on this occasion, and tell you about Access to Work as well and how that works and operates, which is a government fund. And what else am I forgetting to say? I think that's about it, other than thank you all. Oh yeah, we said we were going to give out £1,000 worth of funding for anyone that is starting a social enterprise. So something with some kind of social impact. If you're neurodiverse and have an idea, we'll give you some expertise in starting that up and give you a bit of funding to help that get going as well. So if anyone does want to enter that or put an idea forward, there's some pieces of paper on the table, but we'll take email submissions after as well. So just tell us what the idea is and what your thoughts are, what changes it's going to make, and we will award that funding accordingly. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Keep the conversation going, have some drinks, and also, Pauline, thanks for doing all the social media around the event as well. So yes, thank you, everyone. And thank you to an amazing panel. Cheers, guys.